There is something fundamentally impossible about what Japanese swordsmiths accomplished. They lived on islands with almost no iron ore, no metal deposits, no mines, nothing but volcanic rock and beaches full of sand. Yet somehow they created weapons so perfect that a single sword from the 16th century sold for $105 million. A properly made katana could slice through a silk scarf dropped onto its edge. Modern metallurgists examining these ancient swords found something that shouldn't be possible with medieval technology. Steel containing millions of microscopic layers, edges harder than most modern tool steel, spines that flex without breaking. And it all started with handfuls of wet sand scooped from riverbeds. The method has remained virtually unchanged for 1,300 years. Everything done by hand, no electricity, no modern furnaces. And the process works better than almost anything we can do today. Before we go deeper, drop a comment below. Have you ever held a real Japanese sword? What do you think makes them so legendary? Section 1. Why Japan had no metal. Around 800 AD, Japan faced a crisis. Trade routes became unreliable. They needed steel but had no iron ore. Japan's volcanic islands formed from magma. No sedimentary deposits, no banded iron formations, almost no iron ore at all. Most of the world's iron comes from banded iron formations that can contain up to 60% iron oxide. Easy to mine, easy to smelt, but Japan's islands are volcanic. That's when someone noticed something strange about certain riverbeds. Where the current slowed, the sand looked darker, heavier. If you held a magnet near it, tiny particles would jump toward the magnet. This was satetsu, iron sand. Section 2. How iron sand forms. Iron sand doesn't just appear. It's the result of millions of years of erosion. Volcanic rocks like granite contain iron oxides, typically 2 to 5% by weight. As mountains erode, iron oxides remain intact. Rivers carry this mixture downstream. Iron oxides are significantly denser, about 5.2 grams per cubic centimeter compared to 2.6 for quartz. When water slows, heavier particles sink first. Japanese prospectors developed kanagashi, flowing metal extraction. They dammed rivers and diverted water into channels with steps that progressively slowed flow, allowing iron particles to settle. With this method, they achieved iron sands with 70 to 80% iron oxide, more concentrated than most iron ore anywhere. A single operation might process 100 tons of riverbed material to extract 2 to 3 tons of iron sand. Section 3. The tatara furnace, fire that burns for 3 days. Once they had concentrated iron sand, the real challenge began. Iron melts at 1,538 degrees Celsius. Medieval furnaces couldn't reach that. But they didn't need to melt iron. They just needed 1,200 to 1,300 degrees to chemically separate oxygen from iron. The tatara furnace, a rectangular clay pit about 1 meter deep, 1.2 meters wide, and 3 meters long. Massive bellows pump air through clay pipes. The fuel is charcoal, nearly pure carbon. At 9 a.m., after ceremonial prayers, the fire is lit. Only charcoal is added until temperature climbs above 1,200 degrees. Then they alternate layers, charcoal, then iron sand. The process continues for 72 hours straight. Carbon monoxide from burning charcoal steals oxygen atoms from the iron oxide. The genius of the tatara is that it operates where iron stays solid, but impurities melt. Iron particles sinter together, forming a spongy bloom. Silicon oxides, sulfur, phosphorus flow to the bottom as liquid slag. Over 72 hours, a typical tatara consumes 8,000 kilograms of charcoal and 1,200 kilograms of iron sand. At the end, the furnace is disassembled. What remains is a 2.5-ton block with 800 to 900 kilograms of tamahagane, dual steel, buried inside. Section 4. Sorting steel by sound and spark. Tamahagane isn't uniform. Carbon content varies. Some sections contain 0.5% carbon, others 1.5%. This matters because carbon content determines hardness. Low carbon steel is soft and flexible. High carbon steel is hard and brittle. For a sword, you need both. The swordsmith sorts tamahagane by carbon content using eye, ear, and feel. No laboratory equipment. He breaks the tamahagane into fist-sized pieces. Low-carbon steel has a rough, matte surface with large grains. High-carbon steel is smoother, finer-grained, with subtle luster. He taps each piece. Low-carbon steel produces a dull thud. High-carbon steel rings clearly, a higher pitch that sustains longer. Then comes the spark test. Low-carbon steel produces short orange sparks. High-carbon steel creates long, bright yellow sparks that branch like fireworks. A master can estimate carbon content to within 0.2% accuracy just by watching the sparks. This is one of the certification exams for becoming a licensed swordsmith in Japan. Section 5. Why folding steel creates strength. Take a piece of tamahagane, heat it to 1100 degrees Celsius. Hammer it flat, cut it halfway through, fold it over, hit it again. The two halves weld together. You've just doubled the layers. Reheat, flatten, cut, fold, hammer. One fold creates 2 layers. 2 folds create 4. By the 12th fold, typical for Japanese swords, you have 4096 layers. Why go to all this effort? Because folding does 3 critical things. First, it distributes impurities evenly. Even the best tamahagane contains microscopic slag. If impurities cluster, they create weak points. But spread them across thousands of layers, and no single weak point exists. Second, it creates grain structure. Each fold elongates the metal crystals in the blade's direction, making it exponentially more resistant to bending or breaking. Third, folding creates those beautiful patterns. Each heating forms a thin iron oxide layer. When you fold, that dark layer gets trapped between lighter layers. After 12 folds, these become visible as flowing patterns called hada, like water, wood grain, or clouds frozen in steel. Section 6. Building a blade from multiple steels. A katana isn't one block of steel, it's a composite structure, different types welded together, each serving a specific purpose. The edge needs to be extremely hard to hold a sharp edge, but if the entire sword were that hard, it would shatter like glass hitting armor. Swordsmiths developed kobusu, wrapping. They take high-carbon steel and hammer it into a thin, U-shaped jacket. Then soft, low-carbon steel forms a rectangular core. The hard jacket wraps around the soft core. Heated together, they weld into one piece. There are other methods too. Sanmai uses 3 layers. Shihozume uses 4. The choice depends on what the sword is for. When shaped into a sword, the edge and spine are hard steel, but the interior core is soft, flexible steel. If the blade hits something hard, the edge might chip slightly, but the core absorbs impact and prevents catastrophic fracture. Section 7. The moment that decides everything. The sword is shaped, it's been hammered, filed and ground into a long blade, but it's still relatively soft. Hardening is a chemical transformation at the molecular level, and it all comes down to one terrifying moment, the quench. The swordsmith covers the spine with thick clay mixed with charcoal powder and powdered stone. The edge gets a much thinner layer, sometimes just a few millimeters. Then the blade goes into the forge and is heated to exactly 760 to 800 degrees Celsius. He watches the color of the glowing steel. In a darkened room, the precise shade of orange tells him the temperature. Too cool and the transformation won't complete. Too hot and the steel burns. When the color is perfect, a specific shade of cherry red, he has seconds to act. He lifts the blade and plunges it edge first into water. In less than 2 seconds, the steel drops from 800 degrees to 20 degrees, one of the most violent thermal shocks any material can endure. The thin clay on the edge allows heat to escape rapidly. Carbon atoms don't have time to move. They get trapped, forcing the crystal structure to change to martensite, one of the hardest forms of steel known. The hardness reaches 60 to 65 on the Rockwell scale. The thick clay on the spine acts as insulation. Heat escapes slowly. The spine forms a softer structure called pearlite, with a hardness around 40 on the Rockwell scale. Martensite takes up more space than pearlite. The edge expands while the spine doesn't. This creates internal stress that bends the blade backwards, giving it that iconic curve. The curve of a katana isn't carved, it's a natural consequence of differential hardening. Even if the blade survives, it needs tempering, gently reheated to around 160 to 180 degrees Celsius to relieve internal stress. This sacrifices a bit of hardness for toughness. Section 8. The final transformation. After hardening and tempering, the blade is still rough. The surface is covered in oxidation scale, and this is where many people misunderstand Japanese swords. The swordsmith only does half the work. The other half belongs to the polisher. Polishing isn't about making it shiny, it's about revealing the internal structure, the layers, the grain, the boundary between hard and soft steel. And it takes weeks of painstaking work with stones that range from coarse to impossibly fine. The polisher starts with rough stones to remove oxidation scale. He works through progressively finer stones, typically 10 to 15 different stones, each removing the scratches left by the previous. By the finest stones, he's removing metal at the microscopic level, 1/1000th of a millimeter at a time. The hard martensite along the edge polishes to a bright, almost white color, like a mirror. The softer pearlite in the spine polishes darker, cloudier. The boundary between them, the hamon, becomes visible as a distinct line running the length of the blade. Different clay patterns create different hamon styles. Straight lines called sugaha, wavy lines called notare, irregular patterns called gunoma that look like crashing waves. The final edge is sharpened to about 15 degrees, sharper than most modern knives, which are ground to 20 to 25 degrees. A properly finished katana can shave hair off your arm. It can slice through suspended silk without disturbing the fabric. That sharpness isn't just from grinding a thin edge. It's from the internal structure. The hard martensite contains millions of microscopic carbide particles that act like embedded cutting teeth. As the blade cuts, these particles gradually wear away, but new ones are constantly exposed. A well-made katana doesn't just start sharp, it stays sharp through hundreds of cuts. When a blade eventually dulls, it can be repolished, removing a few thousandths of a millimeter of steel, exposing fresh layers. A single katana can be repolished dozens of times over centuries. That's why swords from the 1500s are still functional today. These swords weren't just tools, they were weapons, and every weapon tells you something about the warriors who carried them. Click here to see the 10 brutal weapons samurai actually fought with on the battlefield. You won't believe what they used before the katana became famous.